My name is Maria Clara, and last Christmas my parents spent $10,000 on my sister's gift, a diamond bracelet that sparkled under the tree lights, while they handed me a pair of socks from a gas station. The price tag was still attached. The moment I tore the paper, I felt the air shift. Laughter filled the room, but none of it reached me. That was the moment I realized that even on the holiest night of the year, I didn't belong. If you've ever felt invisible at your own family's Christmas table, stay with me, because what happened after that day changed everything. Click the subscribe button. I promise, by the time this story ends, you'll feel a little lighter, a little stronger, and maybe your day will already be better. The living room glowed with golden light. The fireplace crackled softly. Cinnamon candles burned beside polished wine glasses, and the smell of expensive perfume floated through the air. My mother recorded everything on her phone, her voice full of cheer as she told my sister to smile for the camera. My father poured champagne and nodded along quietly. I sat at the edge of the couch, holding those socks in my hands, pretending to be grateful. Even wrapped in paper and ribbon, love can still feel empty. They called it generosity. I called it revelation. While my sister twirled her bracelet beneath the chandelier, I watched the light dance across the marble floor. It looked beautiful, but sharp, like something that could cut. That was what love felt like in our house. Shiny, but fragile. The clapping, the laughter, the rehearsed joy, all part of the perfect image my mother wanted to show the world. My father's silence was the glue that kept it all together. My sister had always been the star, the golden child. I was the shadow beside the tree. Every Christmas was the same. The camera pointed at her. The same jokes, the same table, the same feeling that I was slowly fading into the wallpaper. But that morning, something in me changed. When everyone turned back to the fire, I caught my reflection in the window. A girl holding cheap socks while diamonds glittered all around her. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I simply understood. Some gifts aren't meant to warm you. They're meant to wake you. After dinner, when laughter echoed down the hallway, I stepped outside. The cold air hit my face, sharp and honest. Snowflakes landed on my coat like tiny sparks of truth. Through the window, I could still see them, their shadows moving around the tree, their voices rising in another round of laughter. They looked so small from where I stood, like a picture fading behind glass. Inside that house, I had always been the background of someone else's story. Outside, under the stars, I realized I could start writing my own. I walked down the quiet street, the snow crunching beneath my boots, each step closing a chapter I should have ended long ago. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew it wasn't back there. The socks were still in my pocket, warm from my hand. They no longer felt like humiliation. They felt like a beginning. They had given me something small and thoughtless, yet it carried power. From that night on, every step I took away from that house was wrapped in the warmth they never gave me. I didn't make promises of revenge. I didn't look back. I just walked forward, into the quiet, into myself. That was the last Christmas I spent as their forgotten daughter. The next one, I wouldn't be standing by the tree anymore. I'd be building my own, because sometimes the smallest gift carries the loudest truth. They gave me socks to keep me warm. They didn't know I'd use them to walk away. I used to think that being the quiet one made me safe. If I kept my head down, if I worked hard, maybe I wouldn't disturb the world my parents had built around my sister. But silence doesn't protect you. It only teaches you how to disappear politely. After that Christmas, I started remembering all the smaller moments that had led there. They were so ordinary, I hadn't noticed how each one carved a little space out of me. When I was 5, my mother dressed my sister in matching red ribbons and called her her little angel. She told me to hold the camera. Every photo had my sister in the center and me somewhere on the edge, blurry, half smiling, a background note in someone else's song. My father never said a word. He loved peace more than truth, and I learned early that peace in our house always came at my expense. At school, I chased good grades the way my sister chased attention. I thought success might make me visible. Every report card became an offering I laid on the kitchen counter. My mother would glance at the A's and nod, distracted, already planning another event, another photo shoot, another reason to be proud of someone who wasn't me. I never blamed my sister. She was only doing what she was rewarded for. The house was always filled with noise, music, laughter, clinking glasses, voices repeating the same compliments year after year. But my room at the end of the hall stayed quiet. I used to lie awake and count the pauses between their laughter. Those were the seconds I felt most alive because the silence meant they had finally run out of words that excluded me. On weekends, my mother liked to host gatherings. She'd arrange the table perfectly, crystal shining, napkins folded into swans. She'd tell me to help in the kitchen, to keep the trays coming and stay out of the pictures. Once a guest said, "You have two beautiful daughters?" And my mother smiled politely and corrected her. "Savannah's the beauty. Maria Clara is the smart one." Everyone laughed as if it were a compliment. I laughed too, pretending it didn't sting. But that night I looked in the mirror and wondered if maybe being smart was just the word people used when they couldn't find you beautiful. I read constantly. Books became the only place where I existed without comparison. Stories of women who left small towns, who built lives from nothing, who didn't need permission to be seen. I copied lines into a notebook and promised myself that one day, my story would have its own chapter outside that house. My father worked long hours at his store, fixing broken things. He had strong hands and tired eyes. Sometimes he'd bring home a small snack and leave it on my desk without saying anything. It was his quiet way of noticing me, but even those moments carried guilt. Love, in our family, always came with conditions. His kindness could never be too loud. My mother didn't like echoes that weren't hers. When my sister turned 10, my parents threw her a party that lit up the entire street. A rented carousel, photographers, pink lights stretching into the trees. My birthday a few months later was dinner and a cake from the supermarket. I told myself it didn't matter. I was older, more mature, not the kind who needed noise. But inside I knew the truth. Children don't outgrow the desire to be chosen. They just learn to hide it better. I began to count holidays like steps on a staircase leading away from them. Every celebration made the gap between us wider. Christmas, Easter, birthdays. Each one another reminder that love in that house was a contest, and I hadn't even been invited to compete. Years passed in that rhythm. My sister learned to smile on cue. My mother aged beautifully in her own reflection. My father stayed silent. And me. I learned to live in the background, to take up less space, to apologize without speaking. But deep down, something small was waiting. A spark that refused to die completely. After that Christmas with the socks, I felt it start to grow. It was faint, like the first hint of dawn through frost. But it was there. The part of me that still believed life could be different. I didn't know how or when, but I knew the story wasn't going to end the same way it began. Looking back now, I see that being forgotten taught me how to watch. And watching taught me how to understand. I could read every glance, every tone, every secret tension in a room. It hurt, but it also sharpened me. You can't unsee the truth once you learn to recognize it. I didn't realize it then, but all that silence was shaping the woman I would become. The one who would one day stop waiting to be seen and start seeing herself. And somewhere in that quiet, the first seed of revenge was already growing, small and patient, just waiting for its time to bloom. The year after that, Christmas felt like walking through fog. Nothing had changed on the surface. My family still smiled for photos, still held hands in public, still played the part of the perfect picture. But something in me had shifted. I started watching everything from a distance, even while standing in the same room. It was subtle at first. I spoke less. I stopped volunteering to help my mother decorate the tree or organize the dinners she loved so much. I stopped waiting for her to notice when I entered the room. I became the quiet rhythm behind the noise, almost invisible, but not the same kind of invisible as before. This time, it was on purpose. My mother noticed the change, but misread it as obedience. She liked silence. It left more room for her voice. My father noticed too, though he said nothing. He'd glance at me across the table sometimes, the way someone looks at a light bulb right before it burns out. Maybe he sensed that I was already planning to leave. I threw myself into work and study. I saved every bit of money I could find. Birthday bills from my grandparents, tips from a part-time cafe job, leftover change from groceries. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My sister mocked me for keeping envelopes full of cash hidden in my drawer. She said I looked like an old woman counting coins. I smiled and let her think that. People who live off applause never suspect what silence is preparing. By spring, the distance had become my new language. I stopped explaining myself, stopped trying to fix conversations that always turned back to her. I learned to nod at the right times and keep my emotions tucked behind calm eyes. At night, I'd lie awake thinking about what freedom would even look like. I didn't dream of revenge, not yet. I dreamed of peace. I wanted mornings without judgment, laughter that didn't feel rehearsed, dinners where I didn't have to shrink to make space for someone else's glow. One evening, my mother walked into my room holding a new dress. She said it was for my sister's pageant celebration and that I should wear something presentable. I looked at the dress, pale pink, tight at the waist, nothing like me, and realized she didn't even know what colors I liked. She knew Savannah's perfume, her shoe size, her favorite dessert. She didn't know mine. I thanked her and hung the dress in my closet. It stayed there untouched. Summer arrived heavy with heat. My sister traveled for competitions. My parents followed her from city to city. I stayed home, working double shifts at a local bakery. The hours were long, but I loved the smell of bread, the simplicity of it. The dough rose if you treated it gently. The result always matched the effort. It was a kind of fairness I'd never seen before. Some nights, when the house was empty, I'd sit on the porch and imagine my life somewhere else. A small apartment, maybe. A job that paid just enough to cover rent and coffee. Silence that didn't hurt. I didn't know where that place was yet, but I knew I'd recognize it when I found it. In August, my grandfather visited. He had always been the only one who saw through the performance. Over tea, he asked if I was happy. I told him I was fine, the word I always used to hide exhaustion. He looked at me for a long moment and said softly, "Fine is the sound of someone forgetting who they are." That night, his words stayed with me like an echo I couldn't silence. When autumn came, I enrolled in evening classes. I didn't tell anyone. I studied business management, curious about how the world worked beyond our family's small stage. Each lesson felt like a brick in a foundation I was building secretly under their feet. My mother thought I was at the library helping classmates. My father didn't ask. I liked it that way. By November, the distance between us had become a quiet ocean. We still sat at the same table, but I felt miles away. My mother talked about upcoming holidays, about how my sister might win a national title. I nodded, smiling, already planning my own December. When she mentioned the family's big Christmas trip, the one that would cost thousands again, I realized she hadn't even asked if I wanted to go. She assumed I'd stay home to watch the house. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt free. I looked around the living room that night. The framed photos, the trophies, the gold lights wrapped around the staircase. Every detail screamed perfection, but I could see the cracks now, thin lines beneath the gloss. The kind you can't fix without breaking everything apart first. I knew then that distance wasn't the end of my story. It was preparation, space to think, to heal, to plan. Revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about reclaiming the parts of me they had buried under comparison. As December crept closer, I folded my savings into a small envelope and wrote 2 words on it. For freedom. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. Enough to promise myself that next Christmas, I wouldn't be standing in that room pretending to be grateful. That winter, I didn't feel invisible anymore. I felt unseen by choice. And sometimes, choosing who doesn't see you is the first step toward finally being found. The morning I decided to leave didn't feel dramatic. It was quiet, ordinary, almost too calm for what it meant. The sky was pale gray, and the air carried that stillness that happens before rain. My mother was in the kitchen, decorating a cake for my sister's upcoming Christmas party. My father sat at the table reading the newspaper, his eyes moving but not really seeing. It was the same scene I had grown up watching, but that day, I wasn't part of it. I was already somewhere else in my mind. I had packed 2 small bags the night before. One held clothes, the other held notebooks, a few books, and an envelope with my savings. It wasn't much, but it was the first thing in my life that belonged entirely to me. Every coin in that envelope represented a piece of silence I had turned into something useful. When my mother called my name to ask for help, I pretended not to hear. I stood in my room, staring at the empty walls, and realized that even the space around me had learned my quiet habits. The room had never really been mine. It had been a storage space for things I was expected to outgrow. Dresses I never wore. Certificates no one framed. I wrote a short note and left it on my desk. It didn't say goodbye. It said thank you. Not because I felt gratitude, but because I wanted peace. Thank you for teaching me how to live without applause. Thank you for showing me what I never want to become. Then I walked out. The house smelled of frosting and sugar, but underneath it was something bitter, something heavy I could finally recognize as the scent of pretending. I closed the door behind me and felt the air change. It was the first time in years that my breath didn't feel borrowed. The bus station was 10 minutes away. I carried my bags and walked through streets that had once felt endless. The neighborhood looked the same as always. Tidy lawns, the same neighbors waving from porches, the same gossip behind curtains. But I was different. I wasn't walking to school or to the store. I was walking toward myself. When the bus arrived, I hesitated for a second. Leaving wasn't about anger. It was about reclaiming the right to breathe without asking permission. I sat by the window, pressed my forehead against the glass, and watched the town fade into smaller and smaller shapes. Every building, every corner, every light shrinking behind me until it all became one blur of color. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was afraid of staying the same. The city where I arrived wasn't glamorous. It was noisy and gray, filled with strangers who didn't care who I was, and that anonymity felt like luxury. I rented a small room above a bakery. The ceiling leaked, the walls were thin, and the air smelled like bread and rain. But it was mine. No expectations, no comparisons, no applause to fake. I found work as an assistant at a local bookstore. The pay was small, but every day I touched stories that reminded me I was still writing my own. I spent nights studying, taking online classes, learning things no one had ever thought I could learn. The world outside my family's bubble was wide and alive. Sometimes I'd see mothers and daughters shopping together, laughing, choosing gifts for Christmas. A part of me still ached watching them, but it was a softer pain now. The kind that reminds you of where you came from, not where you're stuck. On Christmas Eve, I sat by my window with a single candle burning. Outside, the streets were full of light and laughter, but my room was silent. It didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. I opened the small envelope of money I still had left and placed the gas station socks beside it, a symbol of where the journey began. I whispered quietly to myself, not as a wish, but as a truth. They gave me so little, and still, it was enough. Enough to leave. Enough to start over. Enough to build a new version of me from the ashes of who I used to be. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I slept with peace for the first time in years. The next morning, I woke to sunlight slipping through the curtains and the faint smell of bread from the bakery below. The world felt lighter, like it was breathing with me instead of against me. Leaving home hadn't been revenge, not yet. But it was the foundation for everything that would come after. Because before you can rise, you have to learn how to walk away. And sometimes walking away quietly is the loudest thing you'll ever do. Winter came softly that year, not like the winters I remembered from home. There were no bright decorations, no glittering trees, no staged photos. Just the muted hum of the city, the sound of tires on wet pavement, and the wind brushing against my window like it had something to tell me. I spent most mornings at the bookstore, arranging shelves, labeling new arrivals, greeting strangers with tired smiles. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The quiet rhythm of turning pages and stacking novels made sense to me in a way people never had. Every afternoon, I'd drink coffee by the window and watch life move on without asking for permission. That was freedom, not excitement or noise, just the calm certainty that no one owned a piece of my peace anymore. Money was tight. I learned how to stretch every coin. Instant soup for dinner. Secondhand coats. Heat from a single small radiator that coughed more than it warmed. But I never complained. I had lived in a big house filled with abundance and still felt starved. Now, with almost nothing, I felt full in ways I couldn't explain. At night, I studied online courses, business, communication, small entrepreneurship. I didn't know exactly what I was building, only that I was laying down bricks for a future where I'd never need to depend on people who measured love in appearances. I wanted to create something lasting, something mine. Sometimes I'd take long walks through the city streets after work. The shop windows glowed with Christmas lights, each one reflecting a world I no longer belonged to. Families rushed by with shopping bags and scarves, their laughter echoing against the snow. I used to envy them. Now I simply watched. There was a strange peace in knowing I didn't have to fake belonging anymore. On Christmas Eve, I worked a late shift. The bookstore was almost empty, just the faint smell of paper and rain. An old man came in before closing and asked if we had any poetry by Neruda. When I handed him the last copy, he smiled and said, "Poems are company for people who know loneliness too well." He didn't mean it as pity. He meant it as recognition. And I carried those words with me for weeks. Back in my room, I lit a single candle again, just like the year before. I placed it on the windowsill beside the gas station socks, folded neatly. I didn't light them for nostalgia. I lit them as reminders. Proof that I had survived the moment meant to humiliate me. Proof that even pain can become sacred when you learn what it taught you. That night, I wrote a letter I would never send. It began with, "Dear Mom, I hope the party was everything you dreamed of." Then I stopped. I realized I didn't owe her explanations or updates. My silence was no longer a wound. It was a boundary. A few days later, I received a message from my cousin Anna. She still lived in my hometown and had always been kind to me, even when kindness wasn't popular. Her text was simple. "I saw something online you might want to know about." Then she sent a link. It was a local newspaper article titled, "Hart Family Faces Financial Strain as Beauty Pageant Sponsorship Falls Through." My sister's name was in the headline. My mother's picture, too. The perfect facade was cracking. Sponsors had withdrawn, debts had grown, and suddenly the town's admiration had turned to whispers. I stared at the article for a long time, not with joy, not even with satisfaction, just quiet understanding. Life has its own sense of balance. Sometimes, the universe writes the apology you never receive. Anna texted again. "People are talking. They say your mom's been avoiding church. Savannah's upset." "I'm sorry, Maria. I told her not to be sorry. Some storms aren't meant to destroy. They're meant to reveal who built their lives on fragile ground." In the weeks that followed, I kept to my routine: work, study, sleep. But inside, something was changing. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim of my past. I felt like the author of its consequences. One evening, as I closed the bookstore, I looked at my reflection in the glass door. The woman staring back at me didn't look broken anymore. Her eyes were calm, her shoulders steady. She had survived humiliation, loneliness, and silence, and somehow turned all of it into quiet strength. I smiled, not out of pride, but out of recognition. This was the version of me my mother had never wanted to see, the one who didn't need her approval to exist. Outside, the snow began to fall again. I walked home slowly, feeling the flakes melt against my skin. Every step reminded me that I had chosen this life, the peace, the solitude, the independence. It wasn't revenge yet, not in the way people think of revenge. But it was justice, gentle, invisible, and finally mine. and as I reached my door, I whispered a small truth into the cold air. The world doesn't always notice when you rise, but you feel it, quietly, completely, in every breath that no longer asks for permission. It had been almost a year since I left. My days had settled into quiet rhythm: work at the bookstore, study at night, tea by the window. I had learned to live without waiting for anyone's voice but my own. The silence that once hurt had become my safest companion. But silence has its own ways of being interrupted. It started with a message on a gray Thursday morning. I almost ignored it. The name on the screen made my stomach twist for the first time in months. Mom. I stared at the phone for a full minute before opening it. The message was short, just 8 words. Your sister isn't doing well. Please call me. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands froze over the screen. I didn't know whether to feel concern or suspicion. Every message from her had once come wrapped in guilt, and I wasn't sure if this one was any different. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. The city outside was waking up. Cars moved slowly through mist. Somewhere, a church bell rang. Life continued, indifferent to the storm those 8 words had stirred inside me. Hours passed before I replied. I hope she gets better, I wrote. Nothing more. I pressed send and went back to stacking books, pretending my heart wasn't beating harder than usual. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of my sister, of Savannah's perfect smile, her rehearsed laugh, her unshakable confidence. It was strange to imagine her not doing well. She had always been untouchable, the golden child, the one who never cracked. The next morning, my cousin Anna called. Her voice was quiet, careful. Maria. Things back home are bad. Savannah had a breakdown. She left a competition halfway through. Reporters were there. Your mom hasn't left the house in days. I didn't speak. I just listened to the sound of Anna's breathing on the other end. They lost most of their sponsors, she continued. And people are talking about how your mom pushed Savannah too hard, about what happened last year. Your name keeps coming up. My name? I asked softly. Yes. People remember what you went through. The socks, the way they treated you. Some even say this is karma. I closed my eyes. That word, karma, felt too heavy, too sharp. I didn't want their pain. I just wanted to be free of it. But it seemed freedom came with echoes, and mine was finally reaching back to where I'd come from. After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. The city outside was busy, alive, completely detached from the memories stirring inside me. Yet somewhere deep in that silence, I felt something shifting again. For years, my mother had built a world out of appearances. Every lie, every picture, every perfect smile had been a thread holding her image together. Now, one unraveling thread was enough to undo it all. Part of me wanted to look away. Another part, the one that had learned to find lessons in every wound, needed to see. So I opened my laptop and searched for their names. The internet was merciless. There were photos from the failed competition. Savannah's makeup smeared, her expression empty. My mother in the background, her face twisted between anger and disbelief. Headlines screamed about burnout, image pressure, manipulation. I scrolled slowly, my chest tightening. There she was, my mother, the woman who once said smiling was a family duty, now caught in a photo that showed everything she had spent years hiding. For a second, I wanted to feel pity. But pity felt dishonest. What I really felt was release, like the last door of a long hallway had finally closed behind me. That night, I walked through the city with no destination. The air smelled of smoke and rain. Neon signs flickered across wet pavement. I passed a bakery window and saw a family inside, laughing over cake. For the first time, it didn't hurt. I didn't want what they had anymore. I wanted what I'd built. Peace that wasn't borrowed, warmth that wasn't conditional. When I returned home, there was another message from my mother. Can we talk? Please, I didn't reply. I left the phone on the counter and sat by the window. The candle on the sill had melted into an uneven shape, a small monument to the year I had survived. I lit it again, just to watch the flame steady itself. As I stared into the flicker, memories flooded back. My father's silence, my mother's laughter, my sister's crowns. All of it once felt permanent, like it would follow me forever. But now it looked small, fading, like an old photograph you stop recognizing after too many years. I thought of the little girl I once was, standing in that living room holding a pair of socks while everyone else cheered for someone else's gift. I wanted to tell her something. That revenge doesn't always come with fire and noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in peace. By midnight, the candle was nearly gone. I picked up my phone, opened my mother's message again, and this time, I typed just 2 words. Not yet. Then I turned the phone off and went to bed. Outside, the wind was rising, carrying the scent of winter through the cracks of my old window. I pulled the blanket close, closed my eyes, and let the sound of the city drown out the ghosts of home. They had taught me how to disappear. Now I was learning how to stay gone. And that, I realized, was its own kind of revenge. The message arrived on a Sunday morning when the world was still half asleep. I was drinking coffee by the window, watching the streetlights fade into daylight, when my phone buzzed again. I expected another store notification or a university reminder. Instead, it was from my father. He hadn't written in over a year. His name on the screen looked foreign, like a ghost from a language I had forgotten. The text was simple. Your mother wants to see you. She's planning a Christmas dinner. She asked if you'd come home. The word felt strange, almost ironic. For a moment, I just stared at it, the steam from my coffee curling upward as if it wanted to escape too. I didn't reply. I closed the phone and sat there listening to the sound of traffic below, the hum of life that didn't know what kind of storm that single message had just awakened. All week I tried to ignore it. I buried myself in work, in the familiar rhythm of sorting books and smiling at customers. But my mind kept drifting back to that word. Home. Was it a place or a memory? A wound or a test? By Thursday, curiosity had replaced anger. I opened the message again and typed, "Why now?" He replied within minutes. "Because things have changed. Savannah wants to apologize. Apologize." I whispered the word like it was something fragile, almost unbelievable. My sister, the girl who had once laughed while I unwrapped gas station socks, wanted forgiveness. It didn't sound real. I thought about ignoring it again. But the truth is, part of me wanted to see. Not for closure, not even for kindness, but to know whether their world had truly fallen apart. I told him I would think about it. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I kept picturing the old house, the polished floors, the chandelier that always flickered like it was trying too hard to shine. I wondered what it looked like now. Did the pictures still hang on the wall? Were the frames still filled with Savannah's crowns and smiles? Or had time finally dimmed them? The next morning, I booked a bus ticket. One way. Not because I was staying, but because I wanted the choice to leave again without notice. The journey back was long and quiet. Snow covered the roads like a blank page, and I caught myself thinking about how endings and beginnings sometimes look the same. I had no plan, no speech prepared. I just wanted to see the truth with my own eyes. When I arrived in town, the air smelled the same, a mix of pine and dust. My reflection in the bus window looked calm, older, like someone who had already lived several lives in one. The house stood exactly where I had left it, except smaller somehow, like pride had been carved out of its walls. My mother opened the door. Her hair was still perfect, but her eyes weren't. They carried the kind of tiredness that no mirror can fix. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said my name, softly, almost afraid it might break in the air. Maria? It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it wasn't the sharp tone I remembered either. I nodded and stepped inside. The scent of cinnamon filled the room, but it was weaker, as if even the spices were holding back. The living room looked familiar, but different. Some photos were gone. The ones that remained looked faded. My sister sat on the couch, no makeup, no glittering dress. She looked human, smaller, fragile. When she saw me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Guilt, maybe. Regret. Or just the shock of realizing that the person you used to overshadow is still standing, and stronger than you thought. I sat across from them. No hugs, no tears, just silence stretching between us. My father cleared his throat, the same old nervous gesture. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. My mother spoke next. "We haven't been good to you," she began, voice trembling. "I see that now. I wanted to say sorry before it's too late." Too late. The phrase landed heavy in the room. I didn't answer. I watched her face, the way it shifted between pride and shame. It wasn't easy to see her like that, but it wasn't satisfying either. The truth is, by the time someone asks for forgiveness, the version of you that needed it has already died. My sister spoke next. "I ruined things for you. I let them make me believe I was better." I'm sorry. Her words were softer than I expected, almost childlike. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. We had both been raised in the same theater. She had just been given the starring role. We talked for hours, though most of it wasn't about the past. They asked about my work, my apartment, my life in the city. I told them I was fine. Not happy, not sad, just fine. The kind of fine that meant peace. When I stood to leave, my mother reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Will you come for Christmas dinner?" she asked. I hesitated. The part of me that once craved her approval almost said yes, but the woman I had become knew better. I smiled gently and said, "Maybe." If I feel like it outside, the air was crisp and cold. The world looked cleaner somehow, as if honesty had cleared the fog. As I walked away, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It's not in the act of returning what was done to you. It's in standing tall while the people who broke you finally see themselves clearly for the first time. That night, back in my small apartment, I placed my old socks on the windowsill beside the candle. I lit the flame and whispered a truth I hadn't known until that moment. They had invited me home to heal their conscience. But what they didn't know was that I'd already found mine. I wasn't returning to reclaim a seat at their table. I had built my own table, and for the first time in my life, it had room only for peace. And maybe that was the real revenge all along. Christmas came again faster than I expected. The city was dressed in lights, every window glowing, every song in the air a reminder of something I once hated. That particular blend of joy and expectation that had never belonged to me. A week before the 25th, another message arrived. This time, it wasn't from my parents. It was from my sister. "Dinner starts at 7. We'd really like you there." I read it twice, maybe 3 times. The tone was different this time. Simple, honest, without the weight of guilt or performance. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. The truth was, I didn't owe them anything. I had already closed that chapter. But a small voice inside whispered that maybe this wasn't about them anymore. Maybe it was about me, about proving quietly that I could walk back into that house without losing the person I had become. So I decided to go. I spent Christmas morning at the bookstore. The owner, Mr. Alvarez, had become like a second father to me, kind but careful, always offering advice that didn't sound like advice. When he heard I was visiting my family, he handed me a small wrapped box. "For you," he said. "Something to remind you where home really is." I didn't open it. Not yet. I placed it in my bag and promised myself I'd wait until the night was over. The bus ride home was slow, the roads covered in frost. The same small town unfolded outside the window, the same streetlights, the same porches with glowing reindeer. But I wasn't the same girl arriving this time. My heart was steady. My silence was no longer heavy. When I reached the house, the front door was already open. Warm lights spilled onto the snow, and for a brief moment it looked like every Christmas I used to dream of. except now I didn't need to belong to it. My father greeted me first. His hair had turned grayer, and his eyes held something I hadn't seen before: softness, maybe even respect. He hugged me quietly, and for once, it didn't feel forced. My mother stood near the fireplace, arranging plates. The tension I expected wasn't there. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had finally stepped off a stage after performing too long. "Maria," she said gently, "I'm glad you came." I nodded. Me too. Savannah appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of food, no makeup, no sequins, just a simple sweater and a tired smile. "Merry Christmas," she said, and I could tell she meant it. Dinner was quiet, peaceful in a strange way. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't pretend it hadn't happened either. There was an unspoken understanding sitting at the table with us, a kind of truce that didn't need words. I listened as they spoke about small things: the weather, the town, new neighbors. It was ordinary conversation, but to me, it felt like history being rewritten, line by line. At one point, my father raised his glass. "To family," he said softly. "Not the kind that looks perfect, but the kind that learns." No one laughed. We just nodded. The silence after his words was the most honest sound I'd ever heard in that house. After dinner, my mother handed me a small gift. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a simple silver bracelet, delicate, unadorned, the opposite of the one she had given Savannah years ago. "I know it doesn't fix anything," she said quietly, "but I wanted you to have something that's yours." I smiled. "It's not about fixing," I said. "It's about finally understanding." She looked down, eyes wet, and nodded. For the first time in my life, she didn't try to hide her emotion. Later, I stepped outside into the cold. The air was crisp and full of stars. I could see the faint reflection of the tree lights in the window behind me. For once, they didn't hurt to look at. I reached into my bag and took out the small box Mr. Alvarez had given me. Inside was a snow globe, tiny, simple, with a little house inside surrounded by glitter that shimmered when shaken. A note was tucked beneath it. "Home isn't where you were. It's where you choose peace." I held it in my hands and smiled. When I turned back toward the house, I saw my sister watching me from the window. She smiled faintly, and for the first time, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who probably just wanted love too. Maybe we had both been victims of the same story, just playing different roles. I didn't stay long that night. I said my goodbyes, hugged my father, thanked my mother, and wished my sister well. There were no dramatic tears, no long speeches, just a sense of quiet completion. As I walked back to the bus stop, snow began to fall again. The flakes glowed under the streetlights, soft and endless. I thought about how far I had come, from the girl holding socks under a tree to the woman who no longer needed anyone's permission to be seen. Revenge, I realized, isn't fire or destruction. It's peace. It's walking away whole from the place that once broke you. It's returning not to prove a point, but to prove to yourself that you can, and that you've already won. The bus arrived. I took a seat by the window, the snow globe resting in my lap. The house faded behind me, its lights dimming into the distance. I didn't feel sadness, just stillness, the kind that comes when a story finally knows how it ends. And as the town disappeared into the dark, I whispered one last truth to the quiet night. I went home for Christmas, not to belong, but to let go. After that Christmas night, life returned to its usual rhythm: quiet mornings at the bookstore, long walks through the city after closing, coffee cooling beside my journal as I wrote thoughts I no longer needed to hide. Peace had become my daily routine, and I protected it like something sacred. I thought the story was over. I thought that final bus ride away from home had closed the chapter for good. But life has a strange sense of humor. It loves to circle back, especially when you've stopped expecting it. One afternoon, near the end of January, I arrived at the bookstore to find a small crowd near the counter. They weren't looking for books. They were looking at me. Mr. Alvarez waved me over, half smiling, half confused. "Maria, I think you should see this," he said, pointing to his laptop. On the screen was a video, a short clip someone had posted on social media. It showed a young woman telling her story, the forgotten daughter who left home after being given socks for Christmas while her sister received a $10,000 gift. It wasn't me in the video, but it was my story. Every word, every image, retold by a stranger who had read about it somewhere. It had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. For a second, my body froze. My story, the one I had buried under silence, was now echoing across screens around the world. Someone had shared an old post from a local blog that mentioned my family's name. It had been twisted, exaggerated, dramatized, but at its core, it was true. At first, I felt invaded, exposed, like the quiet world I had built was suddenly crowded with strangers peering through its windows. But then, I started reading the comments. People wrote things like, "I felt this," and "I've been Maria Clara too." Others shared their own stories, forgotten birthdays, overlooked graduations, silent dinners where love felt conditional. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. And that changed everything. Mr. Alvarez watched me carefully. "Are you angry?" he asked. I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "Just surprised that pain can travel so far, and somehow become healing along the way." Over the next few days, reporters started calling the bookstore. Some wanted interviews, others just wanted quotes. I said no to all of them. I didn't need to explain myself to the world. I had already done the hard part. I had lived it. But the universe wasn't done with me yet. A week later, I received an email from a small publishing company. They had seen the viral post and wanted to know if I'd ever considered writing about it myself. "People are moved by your story," they said. "They see hope in it." I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was to delete it. But then I thought about that little girl, the one who used to write promises in her notebook, the one who swore she'd tell her own story one day. Maybe this was her moment. So I said yes. Every night after work, I wrote. Not just about the socks or the gifts or the cold Christmas lights, but about everything. The silence, the watching, the slow realization that love can't be earned through suffering. I didn't write to expose anyone. I wrote to free myself, and maybe help someone else do the same. It took 6 months to finish the manuscript. When it was published, I didn't expect much. But within weeks, it started spreading. People shared it online. Book clubs talked about it. Even a few magazines picked it up. I was invited to speak at a small community event, a gathering for women who had grown up feeling unseen. I stood on stage under soft lights, looking out at a room full of faces I didn't know but somehow recognized. I told them the truth. That forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once. It's a field you keep crossing until the air no longer burns. When the event ended, a woman approached me. She was older, with silver hair and eyes full of tears. "I gave my son a pair of socks one year," she whispered. "He never let me forget it." I didn't understand why until now. I smiled and took her hand. "Then maybe this story was meant for both of us," I said. That night, as I walked home through the quiet streets, snow began to fall again, soft, endless, forgiving. I realized then that the story had never been about revenge. It was about transformation, about taking something small and cruel and turning it into something that could light a path for someone else. But the strangest part came later. A few weeks after the book's release, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, just my name written in careful handwriting I immediately recognized. Inside was a box, plain, unwrapped, with a folded letter resting on top. It was from my mother. She wrote that she had read the book, that she saw herself on every page, and for the first time in her life, she understood what she had done. She said she had started attending counseling. She said Savannah was doing better too. At the bottom of the letter was one final line: "You turned pain into something beautiful. I'm proud of you." Beneath the letter was a small velvet pouch. Inside was the same diamond bracelet Savannah had once received all those years ago, except now one of the stones was missing, replaced by a tiny silver charm in the shape of a book. I held it in my hands for a long time. Then I smiled. Not because I needed it, but because I finally didn't. The next day, I placed it on a shelf in the bookstore, beside the candle and the snow globe. A quiet reminder that sometimes the universe gives back what you lost. Not so you can wear it again, but so you can see how much lighter you've become without it. The gift they never expected wasn't the book. It was the version of me they helped create. Strong, steady, whole. And that, I realized, was the ending they had written without ever knowing it. It's strange how endings don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary days, and only later do you realize they were the moments that changed everything. A year had passed since the book was released. The world had moved on, but my life had settled into something steady and warm. I still worked at the bookstore, still lived above the bakery that smelled of cinnamon and hope. Some mornings I'd wake before sunrise, make tea, and watch the city stretch into life below. Peace still felt like a miracle I didn't take for granted. That December, I didn't plan to go anywhere. I thought my story with home had already ended. But life has its way of writing one more page when you think the book is closed. It was 2 weeks before Christmas when my father called. Not a message this time. A real call. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear his voice again. "Your mother isn't well," he said. "Nothing serious, but she's been asking for you. She wants you home for Christmas. Just this once." For a long moment, I said nothing. The word home still carried weight, but it didn't sting anymore. It sounded like a place I could visit without losing myself. "I'll think about it," I finally said. And for the first time, I meant it without resentment. That night, I sat by the window, the candle burning low beside the bracelet my mother had sent me. The little silver book charm caught the light, and I thought about everything it represented. Not jewelry, not apology, but evolution. Maybe going back wasn't about them this time. Maybe it was about closing the circle completely. So I decided to go. The town looked different now. Or maybe I was the one who had changed enough to see it clearly. The streets were quieter, the houses smaller. Even the air felt gentler, as if time had softened the edges of everything that once cut me. When I arrived at the old house, my father was waiting by the door. He hugged me without words. It wasn't an apology, it was something simpler. Recognition. My mother was in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale but peaceful. "Maria," she whispered. "You came." I smiled. "I did." Her eyes filled with tears. "I've been reading your book again," she said softly. "I used to think it was a story about me. But now I see it's a story about you." I sat beside her and took her hand. "It's about both of us," I said. "You taught me what kind of woman I didn't want to be." And in a strange way, that was still love. She laughed weakly. "You always find a way to make things sound kinder than they are." "I just learned to stop fighting ghosts," I said. We spent the next few days together. No big gestures, no rehearsed forgiveness. Just quiet mornings, simple meals, soft conversation. My sister visited too. She looked happy, calmer than I'd ever seen her. She told me she was studying art now, painting things that weren't for competition or applause. For once, we didn't compare ourselves. We just existed. Two women who had finally stepped out of their mother's mirror. On Christmas Eve, my mother asked if I could read something from my book out loud. I hesitated, but she smiled. That tired kind of smile that knows time is running out, but still wants to fill it with something beautiful. So I read. I read the part where I wrote about the socks, the gift that started it all. How humiliation turned into clarity, how silence became my rebellion, and how leaving became my resurrection. When I finished, she squeezed my hand. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't see." "I know," I said. "You were too busy being seen yourself." She nodded, tears sliding down her face. "I'm sorry." And for the first time, Those words didn't reopen a wound. They sealed it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the same window I had once stared through as a child, the one that had reflected back my loneliness. Now it reflected a woman who had outgrown the walls around her. The next morning was quiet. Snow covered everything in white, erasing lines and tracks, as if the world itself believed in second chances. My father made coffee, my sister baked cookies that burned slightly at the edges, and my mother sat by the fire humming an old song she hadn't sung in years. I realized something then. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really had been. It was about return. Not to relive, but to reclaim. To stand in the place that once broke you and feel nothing but peace. Later that day, before I left, my mother handed me a small box. Inside was a folded note and something wrapped in tissue. I opened it to find a pair of socks. Red, soft, new. I laughed. "You're joking," I said gently. She smiled. "Maybe I'm trying again. Maybe I just wanted you to have something warm this time." I hugged her, and it didn't feel forced or fragile. It felt full. On the bus ride back to the city, I held those socks in my lap and smiled. The irony wasn't lost on me. The story had begun with a pair meant to remind me of what I didn't have. It ended with another pair, a quiet symbol of what I'd finally found. When I reached home, I placed them beside the candle, the snow globe, and the bracelet. A small altar of lessons turned into light. That night, as snow drifted outside my window, I whispered the same words that had once carried me through my darkest winter. They gave me socks to keep me warm. They didn't know I'd use them to walk away. But now, I added one more line. And when I walked back, I didn't need warmth. I brought it with me. Because in the end, revenge fades. Peace doesn't. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't in being seen by those who ignored you. It's in becoming someone who no longer needs to be. That was my last Christmas in that house. And the first one I finally spent in peace.